It's now my great pleasure to introduce Jochen Walz, our head of programs, who will introduce our next speakers. Jochen is the co-curator of this year's marathon. A very, very warm welcome to Jochen Walz.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jonathan Rosenhead. Jonathan Rosenhead is Emeritus Professor of Operational Research at the London School of Economics. His book, Rational Analysis for a Problematic World Revisited, introduced a family of participative methods for structuring problems, especially those involving uncertainty. He has been president of the Operational Research Society and chair of the British Society of Social Responsibility in Science. He's currently chair of the British Committee for the Universities of Palestine. Rosenhead has been introduced to us by Gustav Metzger, and he participated in the Facing Extinction conference at UCA Farnham, organized by Metzger in June this year. Today, Rosenhead will be speaking about climate change and extinction as raising existential uncertainties. A very warm welcome to Jonathan Rosenhead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 15 minutes is a very short time, so I'm going to need to focus quite sharply. So I shall be talking about extinction of species due to climate change, not due to pandemics, nuclear war, or the many other ways in which we might disappear. There's a Paul Simon song about there must be 50 ways to leave your lover, and there must be a large number of ways of losing the world as well. But just one is all we have time for. So that's my frame. Within that frame, my concern is with certainty and uncertainty, which links up to what I think James was just saying about the problems of understanding complexity. Now, my title, somewhere I have let me move this. My title has a neologism in it, which is the word racing uncertainty. As far as I know, I invented that idea about 3 days ago. It derives from the phrase a racing certainty, which is well known and is in all the dictionaries, which is a racehorse considered certain to win, and by extension, anything considered certain to happen, a sure thing, which means it's not quite certain. It's almost certain, and everybody with their, in their right mind think it's going to happen, but actually it's not quite certain. So a racing uncertainty is the mirror image of that. How does this work? There we go. So I've defined this unilaterally as a race virtually impossible to call, one in which any prediction, however confident, is almost certain to be wrong. And I think that's the situation in which we're in with climate change, and therefore, by extension, the extinction which might follow from it. And of course, it's only almost bound to be wrong. A prediction might turn out to be right, but we certainly can't count on that. So that is our situation, I think, with climate change, and possibly with the attendant extinctions which might follow from it. Donald Rumsfeld got one thing right, and that's when he talked about uncertainty. Actually, I think it's the only thing that he got right, as you may know from the current state of the Middle East. But I won't read out the quotation because it's there for you to read. It's a very well-known one. It actually won a poetry prize shortly after it was enunciated. And he talks about the fact there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know that we don't know. And that certainly applies to Afghanistan and Iraq. It's the unknown unknowns that get you in the back of the neck. This was given in an impromptu press conference on the tarmac of an airbase in Afghanistan, which makes it even more relevant. So what are the unknown unknowns that we have in climate change, and why do we have them? And this has a lot to do with complexity, and that leads to uncertainty. And the reason that we have the unknown unknowns is because climate change is complicated. We have different sectors, the economy, the environment, and the society, and there is a complex interaction between these sectors, between the economic activities, the social behaviors, and the natural systems, which all feed off each other and change each other. But actually, it's a good deal more complicated than that, because it looks more like that, which is the previous diagram was simplistic. the sectors overlap, they interlace, indeed they're mutually constitutive. You can't have one separated from the others. And if you look at any one of those sectors, then it gets even more complicated, an almost unfathomable complexity. Now that's a diagram I stole off a website, and I don't pretend to know the details, and I cannot vouch for it. But what it actually displays is the water currents that are going on under the surface of the oceans and transporting in a virtual conveyor belt water at different temperatures from one part of the world to another. And of course, although they're drawn in nice simple lines, we don't actually know where they are exactly, and they will be changing all the time. And so when you start interfering with a system of that complexity, what it will do next is sort of anybody's guess, but that's what affects the way in which climate occurs in different parts of the world. So it's the combined interactions of this overall system, the three sectors, which has a baroque complexity, which ultimately answers the extinction, no extinction, which extinctions question. So that raises the question, how good are we at making forecasts in situations of this unprecedented kind? Here are a few forecasts made by people well qualified, indeed you might say best qualified, to make those predictions. And the predictions starting in 1897 with Lord Kelvin, President of the Royal Society, saying radio has no future, and ending up with the President of Digital Corporation in 1977. That was then one of the biggest computer corporations in the world, saying there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. And in between, we have the failure to predict the 1930 slump just months before it happened by a prominent economist, the Decca records rejecting the Beatles, etc., etc. People who proclaim themselves to be experts aren't always that good at seeing the next new thing or what might happen. But you could say that's unfair because these people weren't using science, they were just using judgment, and that's obviously not quite as good as science. So I've got another example for you. That's from a Shell publication. It shows forecasts made of the world consumption of oil, and the solid line is what actually happened. The dotted lines are where it was projected at the time when the dotted lines leave the solid line, and how far ahead they forecast. And the thing which is uniformly evident is they hadn't got a clue. They never got it right. They got it wrong by tens of billions of daily barrels of oil. And this is a great oil company and other great oil companies making these forecasts, banks of data, arrays of computers, brigades of statisticians, and wrong time after time after time. So we should be modest and thoughtful about our ability to predict the future. In a world of racing uncertainties, overinvestment in supposed certainties can be lethal. So there are different kinds of misplaced certainties in the climate change area. There are the climate change deniers who say, we know that this is not anthropogenic climate change. It may be shifting, but it's not because of any human activity, so there's no point in reining back on any human activity. So they say, leave it to the market. Everything will be okay. And then we have the climate change modelers who say we can predict the effects of different policies with reasonable precision. In other words, leave it to science. The first one is certainly wishful thinking. I'm afraid the second one probably is as well. Now, in the face of climate change, there are two apparent policy choices, which are mitigation or adaptation. Mitigation is the adoption of actions which will reduce the rate of climate change by changing the way that we run the world, primarily by reductions in human emissions of greenhouse gases. The other approach to dealing with climate change is called adaptation, and it seeks to reduce the vulnerability of biological systems and our social arrangements to climate change effects. Those deeply concerned about climate change have normally argued for the former. They say what we have to do is concentrate on changing behaviors. And so they should, and so we should. But it isn't a question of either or. Until we start seriously adapting, why should the public believe that the threat is real or imminent? If all we're saying is we have to change our behaviors, but actually nothing else is going to change, we're not going to get ready in case these bad things happen, then a degree of skepticism seems entirely appropriate and reasonable. And it seems to me that the public, although in a sense conceptually accepting that climate change is a risk, is not yet behaviorally convinced. It doesn't do the things that would follow from it. So, living with uncertainty, I would say living with racing uncertainties. We don't know how bad things are going to get. We're pretty sure they're going to get worse than they are now, but we don't know how much. And the debate about this should not just be between parties and experts arguing about what is or is not the case. The potential gravity of the situation argues for adaptation as well as mitigation. I just end, or almost end, by quoting the Persian General von Clausewitz in the early part of the 19th century, who said, "No plan survives the first engagement with the enemy." Or, in the 21st century version, Mike Tyson put it this way, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." Now, neither of these people, as I understand it, was arguing not to plan. Rather, the quotes argue the need to be flexible. Indeed, to have a plan which allows you to roll with the punches, to make extinctions, therefore, less likely. If we don't learn how to live with uncertainty, extinction actually and paradoxically moves closer to certainty. Thank you.